Up next in the broadcast, President Park rejects the resignation of her current Prime Minister Chung Hong-won and keeps him on after heavy public backlash sidelined two replacement candidates. The two Koreas meet to talk about management of the jointly run Kaesong Industrial Complex, but the quarterly meeting, which had been delayed for 6 months, ends without concrete results. Meanwhile, North Korea fires 3 short-range missiles into the East Sea, which landed in international waters, according to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Primetime News begins now.
Hello, everybody. This is the Thursday edition of Primetime News. I'm Kang Tae-ri.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks so much for joining us. We begin with the top political story of the day. President Park Geun-hye has decided to retain her current prime minister after 2 failed nominations of replacement candidates.
This move is widely viewed as a way for the president to avoid further setbacks to her administration. Choi Yoo-sun has the details.
In a surprise announcement on Thursday, the presidential office said President Park had rejected Prime Minister Chung Hong-won's previous offer to resign and asked him to continue working for the nation with a sense of duty. Prime Minister Chung had expressed a wish to step down in the wake of the Sewol-ho ferry accident 2 months ago. It is the first time in Korea's constitutional history that a prime minister will be staying on after rendering a resignation. The presidential press secretary said President Park, who has promised a massive restructuring of the government and a bolstering of the national safety system following April's ferry tragedy, went through great pains before making the latest decision.
The administrative vacuum and division of public opinion intensified due to the previous nominations. The president has decided the situation can no longer be left alone.
In regards to the presidential office's personnel verification system, which has been heavily criticized after the recent back-to-back nominee withdrawals, a new senior secretary will be put in charge of finding people to fill positions and verifying their credentials. Upon Thursday's announcement, the prime minister vowed to pour all his energy into correcting irregularities in Korean society and making the country a safer place to live. He also said when necessary, he would not hesitate to offer his views to the president on state matters. The ruling party said the president's decision was understandable and that she had put a priority on minimizing the administrative vacuum and moving forward with the running of state affairs. The main opposition, on the other hand, criticized the administration for failing to meet the people's expectations to reform Korean society in the aftermath of the ferry disaster. Choi Yoo-sun, Arirang News.
North Korea fired 3 short-range missiles into the East Sea on this Thursday afternoon. This, according to South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff. An official was quoted by Yonhap News as saying that they traveled some 190 kilometers and landed in international waters. Seoul is still trying to figure out what type of missiles they were and why they were launched. This is the 10th round of missile firings by North Korea so far this year. Inter-Korean talks on ways to improve the Kaesong Industrial Complex have taken place for the very first time in 6 months, but as our Hwang Sung-hee reports, the two Koreas seem to have failed in making any concrete progress.
For the first time in 6 months, officials from the two Koreas met on Thursday to discuss matters related to their jointly run Kaesong Industrial Complex. But the meeting ended without concrete results. Key issues put forth by South Korea included the installment of internet services and the implementation of an electronic entry system to allow South Korean workers to commute freely in and out of the complex. However, North Korea wanted to discuss matters related to the wages of North Korean workers.
We could not reach a conclusion on any special issue and had different agendas in mind, but we each clearly expressed our stances.
South Korea proposed to hold their next meeting in August, but the North did not give a clear answer. The quarterly meeting of the Joint Committee of the Business Park has been at a standstill since December last year, when inter-Korean relations soured following military drills between Seoul and Washington. With some 50,000 North Koreans working for more than 120 South Korean factories, the Kaesong Complex is seen as the last remaining symbol of inter-Korean cooperation. Last year, the factory zone sat idle for 5 months after North Korea unilaterally closed it down amid escalating tensions on the Korean peninsula. Some had taken Thursday's talks as a sign of thawing inter-Korean ties, but it seems conditions on the peninsula will remain icy for now. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Korea's corporate profitability saw a slight improvement in the first quarter of this year thanks to strong exports, but the second quarter is expected to suffer due to the impact of the April ferry disaster. Our Hwang Ji-ae explains.
In the first 3 months of this year, Korean companies seem to be weathering economic uncertainties at home and abroad rather well, reflecting the nation's moderate recovery track during the period. Korea's central bank says that corporate profitability improved in the first quarter of this year from a year earlier, with profit margins reaching 5.2% in the January to March period, up from 4.8%. That means companies are now getting 52 cents in profit out of every $100 in sales, whereas they earned 48 cents in the previous year. Profit margin improved across all industries, save for the shipbuilding sector, with the electronics and automobile sectors leading the gain. The central bank says, however, that the upbeat trend might not continue on through the second quarter. That is because of the ferry disaster in April that resulted in the further denting of already sluggish private spending. For a glimpse at the pace of recovery in the second quarter of this year, pundits are waiting for May figures, which will give a better indication of whether the impact of the disaster is temporary or more long-term. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
Korean women are becoming more active in the workplace and in record numbers, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are enjoying a gender-equal and well-balanced working environment. Our Kwon So-hwa tells us more.
More and more Korean women are working. A recent study shows more than half of women participated in the Korean economy last year, marking a 7-year high. And they prefer working rather than staying at home changing diapers and cooking for their kids. But this doesn't necessarily mean they enjoy their professional lives more, but rather they choose it because it equals out to less stress. In fact, 7 out of 10 moms with young children in this survey said they felt stressed when at home, citing the burden of childcare as the #1 challenge in getting a job and being able to keep it. And that's why nearly half of them wished for the expansion of private and public daycare centers in the country. Social bias is seen as the second biggest obstacle for female professionals. And such tough environment comes against the backdrop of the huge gap in the economic participation rate between men and women, as it stood at 23% last year. There is a glimpse of a trend change, however. The perception of only women bearing the responsibility of taking care of children is beginning to shift slowly, as the number of men taking paternity leave has more than doubled compared to 10 years ago, standing at 3.3% in 2013. Kwon So-hwa, Arirang News.
Wearable technology has now become a buzzword in both the IT and art sectors. Our Park Ji-won went out to an open art studio where creative ideas are being turned into reality with wearable computing technology.
Creative collaboration among IT experts, fashion designers, and media artists on various wearable technology projects is in full swing, ranging from pure art pieces to practical ideas that can be adapted into commercial products. This individual tent, for example, will be folded into a backpack once completed so that it can serve as a wearable shelter.
Basically, the aim of this project is to create the minimal shelter in disaster area.
His team came up with the idea after visiting Jindo Auditorium during the Sewol ferry disaster in April, where hundreds of suffering families of victims didn't have enough private spaces. On a much lighter note, wearable technology expert Kim Young-hee and her team are working on interesting clothes that have alcohol sensors attached to them.
We're going to have a sensor very close to your, chin and mouth. When you're drunk, drink a little bit, this power shoulder will go up, and also the color of the light's going to change a little, that shows how much you're drunk.
One Japanese media art team says the key to wearable technology is establishing a feedback system between human beings and wearable devices.
This system can be used for kind of daily life, so you can simulate anything.
He says the feedback system that wearable devices can offer to humankind will enhance people's awareness about themselves and the world, just as this video art installation visualizes the interaction between shoes and its wearer by capturing walking patterns.
We believe that our walking also tells a lot about us and our relationship with the earth that we are in and then the time we are living as well.
This open art studio is just one of many collaborative projects on wearable technology that are currently underway, a sign of growth for what may be the next big industry. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Korea has become the chosen destination for a growing number of medical tourists. The number of foreigners who came to Korea last year for this purpose actually broke the 200,000 mark for the very first time. And our Lian is joining us in the studio to tell us more. So when these foreign medical tourists fly out here, what are they looking to enjoy?
Basically, high-quality care at cheaper prices. Korea is actually ranked 4th in terms of medical service in the OECD nations, and its 5-year survival rate for all cancers is higher than in countries like Japan or the United States. Now, as for the cost, let's take cesarean sections, for example. In Korea, the procedure costs only 1/10 of what it does in the U.S. And the recent boom in medical tourism in Korea follows in step with a general global trend, with the market's value jumping 2.5 times over the past 8 years.
And I would think that cosmetic surgery is the main attraction, no?
You would think that, but it'd be surprising to find out that cosmetic surgery only takes up about 13% of all medical procedures for foreigners in Korea. Things like internal medicine and family medicine are actually quite popular as well. And there are ongoing efforts to spread the wealth. Take a look.
Rizikuk Sana is on vacation from Ukraine and has decided to spend a few days taking part in a special medical tour program.
Before coming here, I knew that Koreans cared a lot about their looks, so I wanted to experience Korea's medical cosmetic service.
Her tour package begins at an Oriental medicine clinic, where she undergoes a special treatment to improve skin elasticity. It's then off to a health center that specializes in endoscopy procedures. For the Seoul district of Gangnam, the medical tour program is merely the beginning of bigger plans.
In the future, we're going to combine medical services and tourist destinations into one package.
The efforts come as no surprise. Since 2009, when the central government made it legal for hospitals to accept foreign patients, there's been a boom with an average yearly growth rate of 37%.
While foreigners enjoy a wider assortment of medical services, plastic surgery still remains the biggest draw. For that, the most popular destination is Gangnam, home to nearly half of the country's plastic surgery clinics.
Riding the wave, plastic surgery clinics are investing more in overseas advertisement. This plastic surgery clinic has what it calls a Chinese coordinator.
I work on advertisements on Chinese portal sites like Baidu and Weibo, and also work on a Chinese version of the clinic's homepage.
Doctors here say interest in Korean cosmetic trends has spiked thanks to a greater social media presence.
Nowadays, foreigners keep up to date on the popular cosmetic surgeries in Korea through TV programs or the internet. So the types of surgeries they are seeking are becoming more diverse.
So 200,000 medical tourists is certainly a decent number, but how does Korea rank in terms of other countries when it comes to this field?
Well, Korea is off to a nice start, but it still has a long way to go if it wants to catch up to countries like Thailand, India, and Singapore, which do make up about 90% of Asia's total medical tourism market. And Korea is number 4 in terms of medical service, like I mentioned earlier. But if you factor in things like human resources and growth potential, the OECD ranking actually drops to 19. And experts say the government simply needs to do more to push for medical tourism.
There needs to be a government-backed control tower specifically overseeing medical tourism. Right now, the support for medical tourism is scattered among different ministries and state-run institutes.
And he did add that the recently passed bill that allows hospitals to own hotels and travel agencies will provide capital to better tap into overseas markets.
All right, well, with our society aging and other societies around the world getting older, it seems like it will have a bright future ahead. Thanks so much, Leon.
No problem.
Senior military and government officials in Iraq say that Syria carried out airstrikes against Islamic militants across the Iraqi border.
With more on that, we now turn to Paul Yee standing by at the news center. Paul, these reported airstrikes show that Damascus is taking this militant threat very seriously, but it's also raising questions on how this insurgency is being funded.
That's right. Many, especially in the Iraqi government, have been shocked at the rapid advance of these Sunni insurgents led by the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, which is considered the richest jihadi organization. According to analysts, ISIL gets most of its money from controlling energy fields, secret foreign donors, and extortion, and have taken over the country's second largest city of Mosul. ISIL reportedly stole an estimated $500 million from the central bank. U.S. and Iraqi military sources confirmed that Syrian warplanes had launched airstrikes this week against ISIL militants who had recently joined forces with al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria. While Baghdad did not request the raid, Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki said he welcomed any strike against the growing insurgency. And turning now to the crisis in Ukraine, Western nations are warning of more sanctions against Russia unless Moscow acts quickly to further de-escalate tensions in the east of the country. Following a meeting of NATO foreign ministers, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to publicly call on separatists in Ukraine to lay down their arms. While applauding Putin's request to cancel a law that would have cleared him to launch a military intervention in Ukraine, Kerry said it could be, quote, reversed in 10 minutes. Moscow denies Western accusations that it allowed rebel fighters to cross into Ukraine along with heavy weapons, and that it's keeping its troops close to the border to put pressure on Kiev. The United Nations said last week that nearly 260 civilians have been killed since mid-April. That figure is likely to be higher as international monitors have been blocked off from many areas. It's been nearly 4 months since Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 vanished from radar screens, prompting a massive international search for the plane and its passengers. And despite a lack of progress, the search continues. Australian authorities said Thursday that the hunt for the missing Malaysian airliner will shift even further south in the Indian Ocean. The 60,000 square kilometer area had already been subject to aerial and visual searches for debris, but will now be mapped using underwater robots. Australian Deputy Prime Minister Warren Truss said investigators identified the new priority area after a review of satellite data, which indicates the Boeing 777 was on autopilot when it may have spiraled into the ocean. The next phase of the search mission is expected to start in August and take almost a year. Flight 370 was carrying 239 passengers and crew when it disappeared on March 8th while en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. Now, with the last of the World Cup group stage matches upon us, South Korea's final opportunity to advance from Group H will come in their matchup against Belgium. Now it's a must-win situation for the Taeguk Warriors, who must also score at least 2 goals to have a chance to go to the round of 16. Addressing the issue of scoring, manager Hong Myung-bo pointed out that there will be chances to score.
We have no other choice except to score, and I believe the opportunities will be there. The key to winning will be how well we use those opportunities.
Well, Coach Chung also indicated that he would stay with the one-top formation, hinting that embattled striker Park Ju-young would indeed start. However, the key plays will have to come from the midfield, connecting through the wingers on both sides of the pitch. Also, an early goal will greatly increase the chances of a victory.
The flow of the first half will be important. I think if we score early on, it will give us a lot of hope. So we'll do our best to score as many goals as possible.
Well, a high-scoring win is the best scenario, but whether they move on is also dependent on the outcome of the Algeria-Russia match, which Russia must win. And fans in Korea will be out on the streets once again, this time at 5 a.m. Korea time, to hopefully see their team into the next round. And Belgium, meanwhile, is not planning to slow down despite having already advanced. Manager Mark Wilmots says his team will put their maximum effort as usual.
After playing a match, you must forget about it. For me, I began to prepare for the next match 15 minutes after we finish one. We wake up at 7 a.m. to start training. It's not over and we must continue. Right now, we are focused.
Wilmots will rest a couple of starters, including key defenders Vincent Kompany and Thomas Vermaelen, who picked up minor injuries. Even so, Belgium figures to field a solid starting 11 to test the South Korean defense and close out on top. And now let's recap the matches from day 14, starting with Group F leaders Nigeria and Argentina going heads up. Now, Lionel Messi's opening goal within the minutes of the opening whistle was neutralized by Ahmed Musa's strike a minute later, but Messi put Argentina up 2-1 before the half. Musa scored his second. However, Marcus Rojo answered back to seal the 3-2 win for Argentina. And in the other Group F meeting, it was Bosnia-Herzegovina versus Iran, who needed a win. However, Iran's defense were on their heels as Edin Dzeko led a potent attack. Iran's offense managed just a single score, and Bosnia-Herzegovina won 3-1 for their first ever World Cup victory. And with that, Argentina and Nigeria advanced to the next stage. And in Group E, Ecuador went up against France. There are a number of chances on both sides, but it tipped to the French when Ecuador captain Antonio Valencia got himself dismissed from the pitch. But it ended in a scoreless draw, spelling bad news for Ecuador, who needed a good showing to survive. And that brings us to the Honduras and Switzerland game. It was looking good for the Swiss by the half as midfielder Xherdan Shaqiri sank 2 behind the keeper. He earned his hat-trick by the 71st minute, leading Switzerland to the 3-0 win and passed Ecuador to move up to the knockout stage. And that does it for our look at the World Cup tonight. This has been Stephen Che. I'll be back later with more updates.
Tomorrow at 5 a.m. Korea time, Team Korea will play its final group match in Sao Paulo.
Exactly. And our Kim Bo-kyung has the details for conditions over in Brazil as well as Korea. Of course, Bo-kyung will certainly be cheering for an overturn. I know you will, but will Mother Nature cooperate?
Absolutely. It looks to be breezy and misty day in Sao Paulo, and daytime highs there should reach 29 degrees, but numbers should drop to the low 20s by the time the game begins. Now, similar weather is in store for Korea, so things are looking good for those who are planning to cheer out in the streets. At the moment, Jeju is under the influence of monsoonal fronts, which will drop 5 to 10 millimeters of precipitation through tomorrow. But it's a different story for the inland regions because we'll get another hot summer day with high UV levels in most regions, so make sure to apply that sunscreen before heading outdoors. Well, earlier today, an ozone warning was issued for parts of Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province. That has been lifted for Seoul, but remains in effect for Gyeonggi-do province. Moving on to Friday's readings, Seoul, Daegu, and Gwangju make it to the low 30s, Busan to 26. Moving on to other places, Jeju reaches 24, Dokdo hits 22, and Mount Kumgang tops out at 25. That'll do it for now, but I'll be back with more after midnight.
All right, thanks, Bo-young. And that wraps up this edition of Primetime News.
Thanks for being with us tonight, and see you again soon.